we're not, don't. Yeah. We are live. Hello, everybody. I hope you are doing well and that everything is fine with everybody. And today we have a very, very, very special episode of Nespikiw. As you know, Nespikiw is an English word taken from English into Arabic and pronounced in an Algerian dialect kind of way. And speak becomes Nespikiw. And today we're going to speak about this, about how learning a different language can be a very different experience. And with me, I have Henry, who speaks Arabic. Henry, tell us a little bit about yourself.
أهلا وسهلا بكم. أنا اسمي هنري. أنا من أمريكا. So today I'm going to speak a little bit about my journey and my experiences with Arabic. I kind of have an interesting history with the language, I think personally, starting from, learning Spanish in elementary school, which is, the first few years of schooling in the United States. And then, of course, leading up to being now in Algeria. So I'm happy to, kind of address my situation and just kind of speak about learning Arabic from an American's perspective today.
Wow. And similar to Henry, I started learning English when I was around 10 years old. And my journey or experience of learning English is very different from his. And it has nothing to do with school. So we're going to see how learning a different language can mean so many things, and how we learn a language can be so different from each other, even though we're learning like the same thing, which is a language. So Henry, can you tell us about the first time you were introduced to Arabic and how you, like the first time you learned Arabic? By the way, Henry's just here. Like this is all a shtick. He's just here. My hand would show if I just, see? Here's my hand. Henry just here. This is COVID-friendly environment. Go for it, Henry. How was it?
Yeah, so early on, I didn't really know what language would be useful. So kind of my background is that, right now I'm a college student. I haven't graduated yet, but I'm kind of working my way there. Hopefully we'll be done soon. But early on in high school, I was studying Spanish. And kind of as time went on, I started in the International Baccalaureate program. And so that's kind of an international program that a lot of students become familiar with. And so during that, we were able to meet people from different countries, people from different languages, histories, cultures. And so for me, I was really interested in learning Spanish. And so as time kind of developed, I realized, maybe Spanish wasn't the language for me. And so I studied abroad in the Czech Republic in the summer of 2018. And after that experience, I realized that I really wanted to learn a language. And I wasn't quite sure what language that was. Czech was really amazing. It was a beautiful language. But for me, I wasn't sure if that was the one for me. And then following that study abroad experience, I was starting at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I decided to change my major from, I think it was molecular biology and biochemistry. And so I went from that to international studies because I wanted to pick up a language and I wanted to kind of learn about international affairs, international relations between different countries, and kind of how the U.S. plays a role in global society. And so when I was signing up for a language, it was, we had all of the options, Chinese, Russian, Arabic, Spanish, French, German. And so after kind of going through the different departments and, looking at different scripts, looking at different cultures, histories, I kind of settled and decided for Arabic. And that was a commitment for 4 long years. And so the department at NC State has been really, really helpful with everything. Our advisor is Jody Khater. And so, yeah, when I started in Arabic, I really had no idea what I was doing. I remember I purchased the books from the library. And the first thing I thought was like, wow, these books are really expensive. In the US, like textbooks can get really, really expensive. And so for me, I just wasn't sure after I bought that book. I was like, well, this is a commitment from here, you know? And so I opened the book up and I realized that I didn't know any of the letters or any of the script. And so from there, you know, it was a learning experience. And I know we're kind of going to dive a little bit deeper into that. But yeah, that's kind of my first experience in Arabic was literally me deciding, hey, I want to learn a language. The culture of Arab countries in the Middle East and North Africa is really, really interesting to me. And so from there, I've come a long way from learning in person at university to learning Arabic online with the same university to learning Arabic online with a university in Jordan, and then eventually to being able to finally go to Jordan, followed by Egypt. And, you know, now I'm in Algeria. So I've come a long way for sure.
Whoa, God, that's different from mine. This is what we mean by different languages, different experiences. So for me, it was very different from that. When I was a kid, we watched a lot of cartoons in French because, you know, we were in that period of time where French was very popular. And I remember I watched Disney cartoons in French, and I was like, this doesn't make sense. So like I watched Disney shows in French. I remember Hannah Montana, and That's a Raven, Phil of the Future. And I was watching them in French, like they were dubbed. And I was like, no, that's not what Phil is saying. And I was like very curious. And I started toying with the remote and I hit the red button, which it changes to original language. And I was like, what's going on? How is this possible? What are they saying? What is this language? And I didn't know it was English. I just loved watching it. Like, and this developed into me not watching the dubbed movies or series or anything. I don't like dubbed. I like original. I like it. So even if it's Chinese, I'll watch it in Chinese. So I developed this. This developed, which could be a sight condition. But I started watching these shows and I started understanding more and more. And I could see myself. I think I was 9 or 10. And I started like picking up words and using them sometimes and learning a little bit. And it was just purely me listening to things that I didn't understand, but shows I really loved. And sometimes I would watch the episode fully in French and then I'd watch it again in English and try to link them. And then this was me in elementary school. Then when we start middle school, we start learning English. And I remember that in the classroom, I knew all the words, but I had no sentences yet. So my teacher used to call me Oxford because she says a word and I'm like, it means this, it means this, it means this. Like I was the dictionary of the classroom. All of my classmates would be like, Rosa, what does this mean? I'm like, this means this. And if they say a sentence, I'm like, I don't know, but this word and this word and this word are. So I just went from that. And then we started learning English at school. It definitely helped because it helped linking all the words I was learning and giving me a bit of grammar. And by my second year of middle school, I was the best student in English. I always got the full mark. And I was like well known in my classroom that Rosa knows English. And this goes without saying. I was the only English speaker in my family. Both my father and mother spoke Arabic and French. My whole family, no one spoke English. So I was like just the odd kid, just like, can we learn English? Can we watch this in English? So I was the weird kid in my family at least. And then this love for these movies and series and the American culture just made me push myself more, listen more, and learn more. And here I am today, maybe 10 years later. Let's make myself look younger, at least. 10 years later. And I speak English fluently, at least I hope. What do you think, Henry?
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a totally different experience. I think that was one of the more interesting things for me learning Arabic, right? Is that as I was learning Arabic, I was learning just modern standard Fusha. And so for me, a little bit later on was when I was kind of in that grasp of, I want to watch movies. And then I realized like a lot of the movies were in Egyptian dialect.
True.
And so for me, it was like, I don't know, it was really, really weird. It was a different experience. It was very, it was a long process, right? So when I first started studying Arabic, I was just learning Fusha. And so I could, understand Fusha pretty well. And then I was like, okay, let's start watching movies. I want to, make my Arabic kind of go from here all the way up here. And every like Arabic speaker that I knew who spoke English was like, oh, I learned English from movies. And I was like, okay, perfect. I'm going to watch Arabic movies. And I sat down. And there's a whole bunch of movies that we were given like lists of like, oh, hey, watch this movie, watch this movie, watch this movie. And by the end of it, I had watched all of them and I was like, I don't think my Arabic's gotten any better. And the reason was just mainly because of that dialect. That was the more difficult thing for me studying Arabic. We had a very strong focus on Palestinian and Jordanian dialect. And so I kind of fell in love with that, that portion of Arabic. And so for me, later on, I eventually looking back, I was like, wow, Egyptian would have been so, so valuable at the time just to be able to watch films and movies. But I fell in love with the music. That was something I could understand pretty well. And so I fell in love with like Jordanian music and Palestinian music. So for me, I just loved being able to connect with the music, even though I hadn't gotten to the movies yet. There's some films and shows for, focusing on Jordanian dialect. In one of my courses, we were watching Selma, I think it's Selma Saudi, which is it's a Palestinian TV series. I guess it's TV, but it's on YouTube. And so I use that series actually a lot. And we were given that series from my professor, Dr. Elizabeth Saylor. She does amazing work. And so kind of from there, I was able to leverage dialect pretty well. So I love speaking to Arabic, like native Arabic speakers, because when they learn English, it's kind of like the opposite of how we learn Arabic. A lot of them don't learn it in the classroom, but instead they learn it, maybe on the street or maybe movies, films, friends. But for Arabic, it's a steep hill to climb. And then when you get to the top of Fusha, you start realizing, hey, exactly. Like I'm back to the bottom. Like, let's go learn a dialect now. And so I don't know. I think that's another thing for me, at least, why it makes it so interesting. Learning Arabic is that it's impossible to gain fluency in Arabic. Even native Arabic speakers from like Morocco or Algeria or Tunisia, right? Their Arabic is so different than the Arabic in Jordan. And so for them, I love Algerians who, when I speak to them, they instantly know that I have like an Egyptian or a Jordanian twang on my Arabic. And so for me, I'll speak to them in Egyptian, and they're like, oh, what are you, Egyptian? And so for me, that's really interesting. I love being able to speak my version of Arabic and then them understand me and kind of know the region. And I think that's one of my biggest goals, is by the time I'm hopefully as far along in Arabic as I can get, I start realizing, oh, you're Algerian. Oh, you're from Egypt. And so.
Nice. That's great. And it goes to my experience too, because I learned English from American shows. And then when I started expanding my knowledge, and I remember I watched Harry Potter and I thought it was a different language because I was like, what? And then it took me some time to get my ear to follow the way British people spoke, because it's very different from American. And it took me some time to got used to Australian, New Zealand. They have like a very different way of pronouncing things. Like some regions in the UK, when they speak, I'm like, are you speaking English? Is this English? Are you sure? Because like they are kind of like dialects. So yeah, I kind of went through the same experience as you. But I want to talk about the culture, because big part of me learning Arabic was falling in love with the American culture and the American shows and how they live. And that Hannah Montana had a limo out front, ooh, ah, ooh. That was a big part of why I loved and learned English. Was that the same for you, Henry?
So it's kind of an anchor point. I think when I started, when I was doing my research to learn a language, it came down to Russian, Chinese, and Arabic. And at the time, I didn't really know a lot. I knew about different events that, the US had partook in. And so that was kind of it. I knew about, Russia is, highly publicized. China is highly publicized. And so for me, I wasn't really sure about the language. And then I think after my first semester, first like 3 or 4 months of learning Arabic, I kind of fell in love with the language. And then slowly, it was a progression, right? It was, the language, and then it was the music, and then it was, the culture, and then it became art. Like I love, art, like Arabic calligraphy, to me is beautiful. I think that's something English doesn't have, right? Like it's very rare. Yeah, it's, it's calligraphy is beautiful in Arabic. And so, but what's awesome is that I don't understand any of it. It's written in a way that, oftentimes native Arabic speakers don't understand it either. But I think in a way it's beautiful. And so, yeah, it was a progression for sure. And then I think after it's very difficult to learn Arabic without learning the culture. And then it's very broad as well, the culture from North Africa to the culture in Iraq, right? So I don't know, it's when you learn Arabic, you will also simultaneously have to learn the culture. You have to learn the history. And then as a result, you better understand kind of everything. They have a really, really good play on each other. And so that was another reason why I took up history. So I'm currently double majoring in history and Arabic. And so after spending a while learning Arabic, I thought history would be a great way to kind of assist with my Arabic learning, better understanding the region, better understanding the history as well. And so, but yeah.
From chemistry to double majoring in international relations and Arabic history, we can know that Henry's smarter than me right away, and we're okay with it. We don't have a problem at all. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat because we're looking at them. We have a question from Abdul Razak who is asking, is it true that it's better to learn through listening rather than grammar when learning a foreign language? So Abdul Razak, you have me who purely listened to learn, and then we have Henry who went to school to learn. And those are different experiences, but personally, I wouldn't say one is better, but listening is a big part of a language. Henry, do you agree?
Yeah, I think you have, to me, speaking and listening is kind of when the language starts getting activated, right? When you start, it's really easy for you to take a book and just read it. And then, you can read it and then you can write it. And then you could be perfectly sound, just, writing and reading Arabic or writing and reading English. But you have to be able to hear the sounds, especially in Arabic, where there's so many different versions of letters. And on top of that, within dialects, some letters are just completely changed or, not used. So I think it's kind of a mixture of both. If you can listen and you can speak, I think that's very, very valuable, because then you're able to speak to yourself in a way when you start writing and when you start reading. So for me, in my university courses, I kind of speak to myself in Arabic in my head, and that kind of allows me to write. Because oftentimes I do it in English too, right? Like you can write something and it doesn't look right, and then you say it and it sounds okay, and you're like, okay, maybe that's right. And then it's kind of vice versa, where you say it in your head and then you go to write it down, you're like, that doesn't quite match up. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd be kind of interested in your perspective of growing up, and when did pen hit paper for you? Like when did you start writing, and how did you kind of use that experience writing?
So yeah, for me, it was different. As I said, when I started learning, I was purely listening and purely enjoying what I was listening to more than learning the languages. Was not intentional, but going to school and getting the grammar was important. It was important to know why it was I am and not I are. It was important to know how grammar plays into a language. And I think every language, you would need that base knowledge of just what is the grammar and how is it used and why is it used. Like that first level training, like the beginner training is needed. If you don't have that base, I think you can't build anything on top of it. And school did that for me. And I learned Spanish too. And I did like a beginner training, and then I wanted to learn on my own, like the same with English, but I don't have the same time that I had when I was a kid. So it's a little bit slower, but you need that. To me, that's a need. Like that's the base for you to actually build that building, which is a language. So thank you, Abdulrazak, for your question. It was actually very informative to everyone listening and hearing us right now. So now can we talk about the difference of using a language professionally and socially? So, and that goes with dialects too, because a dialect and Fusha are like, because I say cuz, and I don't say because. I would never write cuz in an email. Still, it's like English when it's spoken, it's very like easy going and floating. But Arabic and like Fusha and a dialect are two different territories. How did you approach that, Henry?
Yeah, so I kind of previously have spoken on my exposure to dialect. You know, I took dialect courses at NC State in order to go to Jordan, whereas I've had colleagues, friends who took dialect when they got back from Jordan. And so I've kind of seen every angle of, you know, dialect when it comes to Fusha and Ammiya. And so for me, speaking is so different because I love the way that Fusha is spoken. Because it's very poetic in a way where it's, you know, it flows very well, especially when you add like the really complex grammar aspects and sounds. And so for me, Fusha sounds really nice. And then you kind of start to realize nobody really speaks like that unless it's, you know, a president or a very formal meeting. And so you spend all this time learning Fusha, and then when you go into the professional world, that's kind of what you would expect, right? You would expect Fusha to be used in daily life, you know, like when it comes to professional work. But that's not really what happens, right? You know, you learn Fusha, and you're like, okay, awesome, I can read books, and then you read these books, and it's kind of you're able to read in a way. But eventually you get to the point of dialect where if you want to socially talk to people, if you want to spend time on the streets of Jordan, for me, you have to learn dialect. You know, you can't run around Jordan, you can't run around Egypt just speaking Fusha, because it's different than as opposed to running around Egypt speaking Shami dialect. And so if I'm in Egypt, I can speak Jordanian and there's a chance that they understand me. But if I'm in Egypt and I'm speaking Fusha, you know, it's a little bit more difficult, you know. So you kind of have to know where to leverage Arabic, right? And you know, if you're writing emails to people, that's an amazing way to formally write to somebody in Fusha. Whereas in English, you always, every single time you write an email, you're very formal. Whenever you're writing academic papers, it's also very formal. And then the level of English that you use also depends on each situation. So for example, if I'm speaking to my friends, you know, we speak a very difficult to understand English. You know, we understand each other, we understand the slang, but then when I'm writing academic papers, it's very different. And so I feel like that's very similar in Arabic in a way. But I think in English, the language is very, it's like a cycle, you know, you can understand, it's just kind of the way you speak. But in Arabic, it's to the point where, you know, you may not at all understand these words in Fusha, and then especially in Darija. So for me, being able to speak to people in Algeria, it was really difficult when I first got here, just kind of with the implementation of different languages, different regions of Algeria as well. And so I think socially, Darija and different dialects of Arabic, you know, are primarily used. But for Fusha, you know, academic papers, books, it's very similar to the way that English is taught. So
Yeah, that's kind of very relatable in terms of English, but no, English just stays like the words stay the same. Like dope is dope, but you don't write dope in an email. You should say it was really great or it was impeccable or something, but not dope. So yeah, that there's the street English and like academic English aspect of it, but not to the extent where of Arabic, because literally the Algerian dialect almost has nothing to do with Arabic. It's very different, like the words are different. And I was brought up learning Arabic. This was the first language I learned at school, standard Arabic, al-Fusha. But I don't speak Fusha fluently. I'm not fluent in Fusha. أنا لا أتكلم الفصحى بطلاقة. It takes time for me to find the words in Fusha and to link them. And oh God, and then it gets to the writing and I just lose my head. So we have a question from Wasila who's asking you, Henry, how was your experience learning how to write in Arabic? Because still me, who's native Arabic, I'll be like, is the ta marbuta or maftuha? Or is it da ordon. Like I still struggle with it. So how was that for you?
Yeah, so I think starting to learn writing in Arabic, that's kind of what's emphasized going in early on because you don't really have a full grasp on all of the letters or the sounds of the letters. And so I just remember I opened my handwriting book in Arabic, and the first letter was an alif. And I saw it and I was like, one line straight down, that's easy. And I was like, this language is going to be piece of cake, super easy. And then we move on to the next letter, which was the ba, and then it was underlined with the dot under it, and I was like, okay, a little bit more challenging. And then we went to the ta, and I was like, oh, it's the same letter, just the dots are in different places. And then eventually, we're getting to different letters like like a dod, and things like that, and then the ra. So I don't know, it's a different way to learn, but I just remember it's very reminiscent of when I was growing up and I was doing handwriting books in cursive. Cursive is a different way to write English script. And so when you're learning cursive, it all stays together. And so I think I had a really good leg up just from my past learning cursive, because all of the letters in Arabic, stay together, and it's very similar in cursive as well. But my handwriting in English is awful. So just having really, really bad fundamental like English writing skills, the way it transferred to Arabic was like not helpful. And so I was thinking in a way, I was like, oh, the way the lines are, they're not, solid straight lines. In Arabic, it's very flowy and it would be really helpful. But, I think in order to learn a language, the first and the most important thing was being able to write. And so I spent a lot of time writing, just listening to the sounds of the letters. There's, different letters or different words can have different letters that sound the same, especially to a native English speaker, where a da sound is always a D, a ta sound is always a T. And then an S is always an S, but then in Arabic you have a sin and a sad. And so I don't know, it's very difficult. And so I think just spending a lot of time learning the alphabet in Arabic was really, really valuable, but also being able to listen to the sounds. We had a program where we could, constantly replay the sounds of the letters, which I think was very, very valuable. So.
Right. And the only thing that we share is our horrible handwriting. Up until now, the only thing Henry and I share is horrible handwriting. And cursive is like when the words are linked. Like in Arabic, we don't have that. We don't have like in English, you can write like all caps and it's all unlinked. But in Arabic, it's always linked. And that's what makes calligraphy beautiful, because it's always linked and it's flowy. And I would love to show you an artist of ours in Algeria who does calligraphy all over the walls. Maybe you've heard of him. His name is Sneak to the Top. And he does these murals of cursive Arabic. Oh God, they're just gorgeous. I'll show you, Henry. That's how we will bond. But some of our viewers are very, very doubtful of your Arabic skills. Do you want to speak to them a little bit in Arabic just to show them that we're not lying? Like, why are you doubting us?
Yeah, so I get really nervous when I speak Arabic, which is kind of funny because I think one of the biggest stresses in the work environment or in the study environment is being able to mess up. Maybe that's something I'll touch on a little bit later, is kind of my experiences in Jordan and Egypt. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I'll go for some Arabic, but
أنا بحكي أردني على فكرة، أردني كتير
شوي
ما بعرف، بس بحكي أردني إذا بدك بحكي أردني. كيف كانت تجربتك بالأردن؟ يلا نحكي عنها بالعربي إذا بدك أردني أو فصحى. كيف كانت تجربتك في الأردن؟
أنا اسمي هنري، أنا من ولاية المتحدة، أو باللغة الأردنية ولاية أمريكا، صح. درست في الأردن وفي مصر. عندي اللهجة من الأردن وممكن من مصر. أنا درست في جامعة اسمها قاصد في الأردن، ودرست في الجامعة الأمريكية في القاهرة. بس خلاص.
Wow. Do you believe us? Do you believe us now? بتكلم مصري على فكرة كمان no?
Oh.
ما بتقولش ما بتكلمش مصري أنا بتكلم مصري كمان. Like the thing about us is like Algerian, like I think Arabic, Algerian, Moroccan, and Tunisian dialects are very different from Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Palestine. Like I think we share Libya a little bit, and then there's a disconnect of dialects of where like we can't even get a word in. So I get you. It's a little hard to go from Egypt to Jordan. Like Jordan and Egypt are similar, and then you come to Algeria, well, like, what are you talking about? This is not what we agreed upon. This is not the language I've learned. So I get it. So now let's talk about how our languages helped us travel, if you want, Henry.
Yeah.
I'll go first. So I've been to many countries. I've been to the UK and the US, and definitely speaking a language makes the traveling easier. And it makes the experience more deep because you get to talk to people and have like deep conversations. I remember meeting people on the streets and then maybe going out for lunch and talking about our different experiences. I remember that I was once at Apple store where there was a piano and I was trying to play that piano, and then a guy came and just started shredding the piano, and then I just went up to him and I was like, oh my God, you're so good at it. And he told me his story of how he learned piano. We talked for like 2 to 3 hours. And I think if I didn't speak English, that trip and that memorable memory of me talking to Chan about how he learned piano and us becoming friends, we're still friends until now, wouldn't have happened if I haven't learned the language. And the same, I went to Egypt, I went to Jordan. Being able to speak the dialect has making me very strongly linked to the, like going to Egypt, I was the Egyptian one out of my friends who were Egyptians. They were like, what that is Egyptian? Because I was like shredding that Egyptian. I was like, yes, I'm here. And they're like, oh, your friend is a foreigner? I'm like, I'm the foreigner. My friend is Egyptian. So I just fooled Egyptians when I was there. And I feel if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have met the people I've met or experienced Egypt as much as I do. And I loved my time there. And the same goes for Jordan. I remember because I spoke very good Jordanian to myself, I guess, I got to stay with a Palestinian family. And they were like, no, Rosa, come stay with us. Don't go to the hotel. And I had the best experience of my life with them. Abu Muhammad, if you're watching this, you rock. So yeah, I feel when you know the language, you can get really close to the people. And that what makes all my trips were very memorable because of that. How about you, Henry?
Yeah, so my first kind of experience with traveling started in the Czech Republic. And when we got there, learning some of the languages was really, important. And I still remember some of the words to this day, like Dobry den, which is like, hello, good morning. And so just kind of from that was the moment I realized how important language was with the journey of traveling, with the journey of language. And so when I was supposed to study in Jordan, and due to COVID, all of our classes were moved online and we, stayed home. And so for me, it was really important during this period to kind of understand Arabic more, because I knew I still wanted to go to Jordan and I knew that there would still be a way for me to go. And so, boots on the ground, when I landed in Jordan, I was shocked. I remember I got off the plane. My entire travels there, I was by myself. I went by myself on this trip to study Arabic. And so I landed, and the first thing I did was I looked for the person that I knew. Like I was listening to languages around me, and I saw somebody and heard somebody speaking English. And so I gravitated towards that person. And we had a short conversation, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I'm here. I'm working in Jordan." And so I was like, "Oh, you're Arabic good?" And she's like, "It's okay." And then I heard her start speaking to different people in the airport, like perfect Arabic. From what I understood of Arabic, right? And so after that, I spoke with her and I was like, "Hey, like, you speak Arabic pretty well." And she goes, "Yeah, like it's all right, And so that was when I was like, okay, maybe my Arabic's all right as well. And so I was just able to, speak to people in the airport. And then I realized how important it was to kind of be in an immersive environment, in a situation where you don't have any choice but to speak Arabic. I think that was really valuable, is my countless Uber rides and taxi rides within Amman, and just meeting a taxi driver who didn't speak any English. And so for me, that was really, really valuable, is just being able to use Arabic. And I think getting around, right? Like one of the biggest things we always practiced in class was ordering food at a restaurant, at a matam. And so for me, it was like we would sit down at the restaurant. We knew all the greetings for like, this is what I want. So like in Jordan, you would say like biddi hummus, so I want hummus, or biddi maya. And so for me, it was like those were the most important things of essentially of human life, is food and water. And so that was what we really valued, was being able to order food. And so yeah, very similarly, I was able to kind of use my language right when I landed, even though I wasn't, as far along in Arabic as I am today. I was really, really able to kind of order food, ask for a taxi. We went to the Citadel in Amman, Jordan, and being able to tell the taxi driver, hey, left, right, like at the top of the hill, and all this stuff. I think it was really, really valuable. But I kind of echo the same sentiment with language, being able to get into those deeper conversations. I remember it's like my third or my fourth day in Jordan, and I was speaking with a taxi driver. He spoke very, very little English, but he was wanting to speak English to me. And so as I got in the Uber, we started speaking for a little while in Arabic, and then he was like, "Can I speak English to you?" And I was like, my entire thought process going to Jordan was, I came to Jordan to learn Arabic. I didn't come to Jordan to teach English. But then, after, a few seconds, I was like, okay, this is the perfect opportunity for me to kind of give back the same thing I'm taking, which was being able to speak with him in English, and being able to walk through the language. And so one of the more valuable things for me that I was kind of taught is, when you don't understand a word in a language, don't instantly go to translate it, but instead use what you do know to kind of reach the point that you want to get at. And so I kind of helped him. Any words he didn't know, we would kind of walk there with the words he did know. And so in Arabic, I think that's also very valuable, which is that if you don't know a word, being able to at least articulate what you're trying to get at. And so I was able to, kind of use that leverage the entire time I was in Jordan. And one of the deepest conversations I had, at least to me, was about telephone companies in Jordan. I think it was, like my first or my second week in Jordan. And I was speaking to a taxi driver. Those were the, most valuable conversations came from the entire time I was there, speaking with taxi drivers. But you're speaking about telephone companies, and he was asking me, what telephone company did you buy in Jordan? And so we got to this point, at the end of the conversation, he was like, "Oh, I'm asking you all these questions because I work for a telephone company." And then I was like, "Was this a survey? Is he trying to get public opinion on phone companies?" But what I realized is that he like totally spoke English. He was just trying to work with me to speak about something in Arabic that maybe I might not be familiar with, which is really strong and valuable. And that's something I really like to stress to people when they're learning English or they're learning Arabic or any language, which is going out of your comfort zone and being able to speak about things that you may have no idea what you're talking about. And yeah, so I mean, one of the things I'll get into hopefully later on, like I said, is kind of being ready to fail at a language. I think that's something I really like to promote, and I really love to talk about. So.
Well, I want to talk about that because I'm failing Spanish so bad. But before we go to that, can we speak a little bit about your experience in Algeria? And how do you think Algerian dialect is different from Arabic? Have you been able to practice your Arabic at all? Like, how does Algeria treat you when it comes to Arabic dialect, and how was that experience and all?
Yeah, it's very different, right? We've previously spoken. It's really difficult to kind of understand, for me at least, Algerian dialect. But I think being ready to fail, is something that I really, really value, especially when it comes to Algerian dialect. Learning words and then realizing, like, one of the biggest things is I would always say shukran to people because it's kind of what you do. And then I went from saying shukran all the time to saying saha, and when I introduce myself, I don't say ahlan or marhaba, but I said washrak. And then one of the big things in Egypt all the time I would say is like amale. But for me, it was really, really valuable to, commit to the dialect and being able to commit to the language. And so my Algerian dialects, it's coming along. It's coming along. So
it's coming along. And are you at the Saha, inshallah, Bismillah? Are you good with all of those?
Yeah, inshallah, mashallah, we use those a lot in
Arabic too.
Within my friend group in Jordan, Egypt, and back in the States. So that's really good. Really good terms to know for sure.
Amazing. Well, for me, like the different dialects for English, as I said, they're not really different, but the pronunciation is different, but still the words are the same. But for Arabic and Fusha, like Fusha is such a rich language. I think we have like 20 words for lion, like just lion. Lion is 20 words. And that's like, to me, is just beyond believable because it's such a rich language. It has so many words for, like, you can describe something in so many words. And as you said, it's poetic, it's beautiful. And English to me is more of a direct language, and it's why I like it. It's like straight to the point. Let's not beat around the bush. That's only one word. The sun is the sun, and that's it. Lion is lion, and let's not look for other words to describe a lion. So to me, I like the directness of English, and that's why I gravitated. And you like the poetic part of Arabic, and that's why you gravitated. So as we said, it's an experience. Now, maybe we talk about failing languages. Can you tell me which language you failed, Henry?
Yeah, I mean, it's Arabic. I think that's kind of the best answer, is that it's Arabic. And I hope it's the same in English for a lot of people. And the reason for that is because that's how you better yourself, in a language. Countless times, me speaking Arabic, on live, right? Of course, there's mistakes I've made, and that's, it's about getting the message across. And hopefully, if the person that you're speaking to or the audience you're speaking to isn't understanding, then you're able to kind of walk yourself up to that point. And so, especially in street conversations for me in Egypt and in Jordan, people were very welcoming when it came to using Arabic. People wanted to speak to me in Arabic, and they also wanted to speak to me in English. And so when I realized that as I spoke Arabic and I failed at this language, I was able to better myself and more strongly learn. I realized that people were doing the same in English, which is that they're speaking to me in English, and even if I don't quite understand the message, them attempting to do so and then becoming confident speaking to a stranger is very valuable, especially in Egypt and Jordan, where oftentimes they may not see an American every day, and so they might be spending this long period of time learning 6 or 7 years of learning English, right, through movies or films or music, and then I'm the American they get to speak to. That was kind of when I put it in perspective that, I love when people are failing at this language, because for me, their failures are also ways for them to learn and for them to build the language. And so that was something, as I've gone through university, but also speaking to people on the street, is having people who support failure, but also who are making you a better language learner. And that's one of the most important things in language, I believe, which is, preparing to fail, because when you're prepared to fail, you're able to build a stronger language base. And if you have people around you who are willing to help you and willing to work with you, that's very beneficial in every language, especially Arabic and especially in English. English is one of those languages where the sounds vary between people. The United Kingdom has a different dialect or sound. English in the United States has a different sound. And oftentimes English learners have a mixture, of everything. They watch films in British English, and then they watch films in American English. And sometimes it's a mixture of everything. And then they hear a word in British English, so they know the word. But then when they're speaking to me, they have a full American accent until they reach this one word, and I kind of lose it. I'm like, I don't, what word is that? And then they say it, and they only know how to pronounce it in British English. And so I think I do the same in Arabic, right? Like there's certain words that I pronounce with a Jordanian dialect, and then there's some words that I pronounce with a Mosri accent. And so it's it's working with people and communicating and getting through the failures, but making these failures kind of into successes, which I think is language as a journey, right? Life, life is a journey, and there's always milestones, there's always steps and stairs to climb. And I think language is definitely the same. And I've talked about it, but it kind of sums up Arabic, which is that, it's a steep mountain. But then when you get to the top of this mountain, you're looking around, and there's like, Jordan's this direction, Syria's this direction. And as you, spread out and you go these different directions, you realize it's a mountain, that you're climbing of dialect. And so, I just really encourage people to use English, even if it doesn't make sense to you, or people don't understand what you're saying, just kind of use what you do know, to build what you don't know.
Yeah. And this goes also to what you mentioned about immersion. Like when you are in a situation where you can only speak that language, all that knowledge that you think is not there just comes up rushing to save you and to make you like you find the words, you end up finding the words. And that was for me with English. I just didn't just start speaking English. As he said, it was a long journey. I made so many mistakes. I still make mistakes. Let's talk about chemistry in English. I'll not know a word about it because it's not something I learn. Like I don't just dabble in chemistry for fun. So still, like a language is a big journey. It takes a long time. Give yourself time and learn from your mistakes. Don't be like, oh, I don't want to speak in English because I make a lot of mistakes. No, actually make those mistakes and have people around you who are willing to correct them, and then learn from those mistakes until you become better. And that what is learning from your failures. I just failed a little bit here. Learning from your failures is. So at the end, I want to thank Henry. Henry, can you thank them maybe in Arabic and say something at the end?
Sure. شكرا كثير من كل شيء, كل حاجة, for the Egyptians out there. It's been great, being able to speak about Arabic, and the language. I love Arabic. I love the language. It's always a learning process. So if anybody in the comments has some good suggestions for calligraphy or music, I love Algerian music. Khalid, the famous musician, one of my favorite musicians nowadays.
What's your favorite Khalid song though?
C'est la vie is good, but obviously, I know more French, but Aisha is also, of course, Aisha is one of my favorite songs. And so
have you dabbled in Didi?
No.
I will show you Didi. Okay, I'm teaching you Didi Didi. Well,
شكرا ومع السلامة.
Thank you, Henry. Shukran for everyone who has watched us. We go live every Wednesday with a different topic or a different show. Please join us next Wednesday for another live. I'm Rosa. I'm from the U.S. Embassy, and I would love to see all your beautiful faces, but I can't. This is why we do lives. So please join us next Wednesday at 6 p.m. for another show, another live, and maybe me. We never know. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you.
Yay!